Brandis Friedman. She is the chief anchor at Chicago Tonight. And I want to first just begin with the breaking news that you mentioned before the interview.
That's right. So, yeah, a little bit of breaking news, and we learned about this. If our show goes on at 5:30 Central Time, we learned about this at like maybe 4:55. And so, trying to get as much information as we could from our reporter who is down at the courthouse and has been sitting in on this hearing all day long. Earlier this week, when the Trump administration deployed troops from Texas to the state of Illinois to protect ICE agents who were carrying out immigration sweeps in and around the Chicago area. The state and the city sued the Trump administration. That hearing was set for today, and the judge late today made the ruling because it was, the hearing took a while. The judge made the partial ruling that the Trump administration could not deploy troops to Illinois, granting sort of that partial restraining order. I have not seen that order yet. She says that she's going to issue a full written order on Friday of this week. So still kind of waiting to get a little bit more information, but that's sort of like the nugget of what's happened.
What is actually happening on the ground?
Okay, so there's a whole lot happening on the ground. There are, and it depends on, if you're following social media, and then there's, legacy media and the news and all that stuff. There's a lot going on. Um, West of Chicago, there is an immigration sort of detention. It's a processing center. It's not really a detention center in Broadview, Illinois. It's a suburb. Small town, but that is where that center, that processing center is. It has been the center as well of a lot of protests that have been happening. You'll see some elected officials as well as candidates going there to protest, to the point where earlier this week, the mayor of Broadview has issued sort of limited protest hours from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Because those protests have also led to a lot of clashes. We have seen, there was a CBS Chicago reporter who said, I think it was last weekend, that an ICE agent, fired a non-lethal sort of, I'm not sure what kind of bullet at her car, non-lethal bullet at her car. And she was just driving by to check the area out, as she does all the time. It's happened a couple of times there where you've seen the protesters sort of form sort of a human chain to try and block ICE vehicles from coming and going. So it has gotten, a little rowdy over there, to the point where the Broadview mayor felt it best to issue those limited hours of protest. Also happening in and around the city of Chicago, you've got ICE agents appearing at various locations to pick up people who they believe to be undocumented, or what they're calling illegal aliens, but to be undocumented immigrants. In those communities. So a lot of communities have organized in response, what they're calling rapid response teams, and they are, sharing these bright orange whistles, and telling folks, what, if you spot ICE in the community, you can blow the whistle. And letting folks know, because the community organizers are saying that ICE is jamming the cell phone towers in the area and making it difficult to communicate by text. And so, with the ICE agents appearing in masks and wearing fatigues, and they're carrying large weapons. I saw an image this week of one of them sitting inside what looks like a tank, but it's not a tank, right? Like, I don't know what kind of vehicle it is. And he's masked and aiming a weapon at an unarmed woman. So that's frightening. That's just a disturbing image to see, first of all. But there's also, ICE is also saying that folks are using their cars to box people in, to box agents in, to prevent their units, their cars from going places. And there are some instances where you might say maybe it has gotten out of hand, because protesters, they're fighting really hard to protect immigrants. And so there's a lot going on. Tensions are high, emotions are certainly high in the city of Chicago. This is pretty much all we're talking about. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
And you mentioned some of the ways that community members, they're kind of stepping up on behalf of their undocumented immigrant neighbors, because obviously they've cultivated relationships with their neighbors and feel very passionately about those neighbors and protecting them. What are some of the different other ways that community members are responding, and what is the impact that all of this has had on the undocumented community in Chicago?
So I've seen, a few ways other people who support, immigrant communities are responding, with little ways like you don't have to go out there with a protest sign and protest. You can hold up your camera if you see something happening, for sure, is what like the governor is advising people to do, is what people are being advised to do. But they're also like just go to that community and have a meal at a restaurant or patronize a business because a lot of these businesses are suffering. I met someone recently and I know that this man has a wife. His wife is undocumented and she's not going to church, she's not going to the grocery store, she's not leaving the house basically for fear. She's not traveling. I think they were supposed to go to a wedding recently. She's not traveling for fear of being scooped up by ICE. So we know that it is certainly causing fear in the communities. Parents afraid to take their children to school. The mayor received a question today about whether or not Chicago Public Schools would create sort of a remote virtual learning option for children for children who can't come to school, for children whose parents are afraid to bring them to school. And so that's the other way I think people are supporting as well, is sort of helping parents with getting their kids to and from school in communities where there is a high concentration of immigrant families and they are fearful.
And of course, we've seen the city of Chicago and state of Illinois push back by filing lawsuits. We also saw this executive order from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson essentially saying that ICE and immigration enforcement can't park in certain areas or operate from certain areas that are private property. And so the mayor, how does he feel about the way that this has all unfolded and his response to it?
Yeah, so you're referring to the ICE-free zones executive order that the mayor signed earlier this week. There's some question about the enforcement of that particular order, saying that, ICE can't use public property or private property where those private business owners or private, whoever owns that private property does not want ICE facilitating any of their actions from those locations. So, the mayor and the governor have been in lockstep in agreement with not agreeing to with ICE's presence here. They have been very critical of the Trump administration and calling it unconscionable and unconstitutional for him to deploy National Guards members, certainly National Guards members from another state to this state. There's some question over the constitutionality of that. I have heard that it is unconstitutional, but I've also heard that it has happened in other cases. And we're reporting today as well that the California National Guard has been sent to Illinois. Today is the first day that I have heard that, and I find that interesting. But it can happen, I guess. We're still learning every day. So yeah, so the mayor has been quite vocal, and we've heard from him as well as the governor pretty much every day over the last few weeks in firm opposition to what the president is doing.
These questions that we have about constitutionality, I'm sure that residents of Chicago also have because there just has not been a situation where there has been such legal complexity. So, how do people in Chicago feel about all of this?
I guess it depends on who you ask, right? Because we have heard the president say that there are Black people in Chicago who support the deployment of the National Guard. Um, we've only been able to identify one one Black person, and there's one specific woman who is a MAGA supporter and a supporter of the president, and she's been in the newspaper as well. That said, there are some community members who say that, if you're talking about crime, that the crime in Chicago is a problem and that that the federal help would be welcome, right? Like, yes, we should send in the National Guard to support crime. The problem with that is the National Guard cannot be used for crime, right?
Correct.
They have no arrest authority. And I mean, and is that what people really want? Do they want National Guards people, with large weapons, patrolling their neighborhoods? A long time ago, and long time in the scheme of all of this, several weeks ago, one Chicago alderman suggested that maybe all guardsmen could be, or guards members could be used to secure downtown Chicago, so that Chicago police officers could be used because sometimes they are just positioned in downtown Chicago, increasing their presence, which there's the hope would lower crime. Instead, those officers can be sent out to the communities in Chicago to protect and serve there. So it depends on who you ask. We hear from a lot of Chicagoans, especially community organizers, who are opposed to this whole thing, the way that ICE is behaving, as well as the deployment of National Guard. I think they're probably the majority of Chicagoans, but that does not mean that that's, the only opinion of Chicagoans. There's certainly some who maybe are a little bit quieter, who actually support what's happening.
Crime, it's one politically that politicians lean into. And obviously, the response will often be, by any measure. But of course, people differ in their willingness of how far to go in addressing crime. But looking at this statistically by the numbers, how is crime in Chicago? Because that is kind of the crux of this whole debate right now.
Right, right. And that's, I mean, it is, right? I also feel like the president is, he's making it about these two different things and blending them and making them one. And one of them is not actually possible, with the tools that he is trying to use, right? Is it about crime or is it about immigration? And you've got ICE agents who are doing what they're doing, including the thing that I did not mention, which was helicoptering onto a South Shore apartment building and, taking people, knocking down doors, taking people out of their apartments and, holding them in a van for a little bit, ransacking those apartments. I think some folks from there were actually detained. But a lot of folks, were sent back into their apartments because they had done nothing wrong, yet, ICE still beat their door down. So that's one thing. But to answer your question, crime in Chicago is down, right? And I think a lot of the cities where the president has been talking about deploying the National Guard, cities across the country are noticing a decrease in crime. And a lot of elected officials have said, if you really wanted to help us with crime, then you would restore the funds that you recently cut. You would coordinate with local officials, between, local officials here and ATF, DEA, as well as, FBI, so that we could fight crime using those tools versus the National Guard. You would restore funds that we were using for community violence intervention. Because a lot of folks would say, crime is not just about crime, it's about a whole lot of other issues. So let's address those. At the same time, there are folks who say, the crime in my neighborhood is ridiculous. My car was broken into, my nephew was shot. They've had their fill of it, right? So I think it's going to take a palette. I think a lot of folks are thinking it's the National Guard is not the answer.
This issue of crime, there is obviously nuance to it for sure. And I do wonder because obviously I imagine now it would be difficult for this to happen, but are city officials and state leaders open to having conversations about crime at a later time? Because of course they're right now engaged in legal action, but is that something they're open to, or is it kind of in the air as of
I
right
think
now?
they would always be open to having a conversation about crime, but I think they want it to be about the solutions that they believe are working, like community violence intervention. And I think they think it is about, guns and the flow of illegal guns, and they would like to see the federal government help with that because, Illinoisans can't go to Indiana to, stop the gun flow. They can only stop it from here, of course. And so that's going to take federal coordination. So yeah, I think they would definitely be open to having a conversation. I'm not sure that the conversation is going to be very productive after this whole mess, right? I'm not sure how well that's going to go, if it were to get to that point.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.